Hello and happy Labor Day, and welcome to Boomer Banter, the podcast where we have real talk about aging well. My name is Wendy Green, and I am your host. And with many years of aging well experience already and plenty more to come, I am here to tackle all the uncomfortable, unexpected, and hopefully life-affirming questions you've been pondering to help make the journey a little less rocky and a lot more fun. If you want to age well, you are in the right place. So, end of life conversations. Death is one of those great unknowns. None of us know for sure what happens after we die. And things that are unknown tend to be scary. But we all know we are going to die, and we all hope to avoid suffering. I have been very fortunate that my parents spoke often about their wishes for end of life. I say fortunate because death is typically something that people are uncomfortable talking about. But because my parents started talking to us about it so many years ago, they have normalized the idea of talking about death and dying. Does that make it more comfortable to think about losing someone? I don't think comfort is the word I would use, but there will always be the sense of loss, a void in the space that your loved one filled. What I think these conversations have done for my parents is make them more comfortable about how they will be cared for in the end of their lives. I know this was true for my father. It also alleviates the confusion and disagreements my siblings and I might have had because we very clearly understand what their end of life wishes are. Catherine Marienau, PhD, is a professor emerita at DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois, where she mentored and taught adult learners in BA and MA degree programs. In 2019, Catherine became active in the end-of-life options movement and was trained as an advocate by the national organization Compassion and Choices. At the local level in Oak Park, Illinois, Catherine is a member and former co-chair of the End-of-Life Options Coalition. She facilitates the book club and speaks at various organizations on behalf of the movement. Catherine is also the co-host of the podcast Women Over 70, Aging Reimagined with Gail Zalitsky. I had the pleasure of being a guest on their podcast in July. That was episode number 289, and I will put the link to that show in the show notes. But our goal with this discussion today is to give you some tools and ideas to think about what will be important for you and your care as you are nearing the end of life, and to share some ideas about how to begin to have these conversations with your loved ones who will be there to carry out your wishes. So please join me in welcoming Catherine Marienau to Boomer Banter. Hello, Catherine.
Hello, Wendy. Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, I so appreciate you joining us on this Labor Day holiday for this very important discussion. I'm curious, you said in 2019 is when you kind of joined the end-of-life options movement. What was it that interested you and compelled you to get involved?
Well, in 2019 is when I retired from my full-time work at DePaul University, and I was looking for a way to be involved in my Oak Park community, which I had not been very much before then, and I wanted to do something meaningful.
Mhm.
And I had witnessed too many family and friends die in their dying process, and I had heard about Compassion and Choices, and I decided that's something I really wanted to be an advocate for. I went to a planning meeting in September of 2019, 2 weeks later, I was co-chair of our action team.
Wow.
Evolved ever since. I must have been quite enthusiastic.
Yes, well, these volunteer organizations are always glad to have somebody to help. So, I said at the beginning, part of the discussion has to focus on ourselves first and what we imagine we want as care. How do we know what our choices are, our options are for end of life care that we can start to make plans?
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to start because I think if we were to rely on our medical teams, we probably wouldn't get that information
Mhm.
unless it's an unusual set of an unusual team. So, what Compassion and Choices as a really wonderful advanced planning guide,
My end of life decisions.
end of life decisions. It's really quite comprehensive and it walks you through one of the most important parts of that, I think, is a values checklist.
Mm.
Given these scenarios, given these situations, what what are your wishes? What would you choose? And I've done this any number of times now, and I just went through it again last evening. And I find that I change my very important, not important slightly. So I think it's important that this is something that we look at for ourselves and we visit and revisit because our life situation changes. Something happens to people around us. We start to think about things a bit differently. So they have a list of items about how important are these things to you, such as
Such as
let nature take its course. So whatever interventions, any heroic measures, do you want those? Do you not want those? What's more important to you? The quality of your life or the quantity, the longevity.
that's
And
a tough one,
they're
right?
all tough. Actually, they're all tough. What are my spiritual, my religious beliefs, and how does that enter in? How independent do I want to be? I've
Mm.
talked to someone recently who said, well, if she was paraplegic, that's it. She's no more. Somebody else might have a different take on that.
Mhm.
Some people think that it's part of the plan to suffer pain. That's part of the dying process. Others say, keep me as free as possible. Do you want to make a contribution to medical research or teaching? Do you want to be mentally alert and competent? It's about how important are these things as we think about ending the end of life phase. Do we want to die more quickly or linger? Do you want to avoid expensive care or,
Huh.
so
So
these,
many choices.
there
Yeah.
are many choices and they're not easy. And then who do you want to be with you when you're dying? If you have medical procedures, would you want to be on a respirator or hospital intensive care or chemo or surgery?
Yeah, I mean, these are tough choices, and I know for myself, the first time I went through something like that, I was probably in my 60s the first time I did it, and it doesn't seem as close, it doesn't seem as real then, right? So you're just like, "Well, I don't want any pain, and I don't want any heroic measures, and I don't want this, and I don't want that." And then I think as you get older, you take a little more time thinking about those things.
Yes.
Now what does it mean if I don't want heroic measures, but my granddaughter is getting married? Do I want to live long enough to see that? So there's a lot that goes into the thought process.
There's a great deal. And as I mentioned, I think it's an evolving process because one of the strong words of advice is do this planning now while you're okay, while you're in good health, and then be open that you may change your mind about things.
Mm.
I had a dear friend who had a rare illness when she was in her 40s, and as her disease progressed, she said, "Well, it's a new plateau, and now I'm adjusting to this. So I can live this way. I can live like this." Whereas earlier she would have said, That's it. I'm not going to stand for all of what she went through." But I
Mhm.
think, and I know you mentioned your parents.
Mhm.
My mother died when she was just last year when she was 90, almost 98, and my father 20 years before that, they were really good about planning for after they died.
Mm.
Life insurance. They had the mausoleum set up. They had all of their funeral. My mom had her funeral planned 20 years ago. But we didn't talk so much about, well, what about those last phases when you are actually facing death at some point? Now,
So even with the work you're doing, you couldn't get her to talk to you about it.
um, she more, well, my father was 20 years ago, so he
Right.
was relatively young when he died. But my mother was, well, God will let me know when it's my time.
Mhm. And a lot of people feel that way.
Mm. And at the very end, after her last hospital stay, when she came back, she said, "That's it. I am not there, don't no more hospital. Don't do anything." So she was very clear about that. But it wasn't until pretty late. But thankfully, I have 2 sisters, and we were all very open about talking with each other and, with her as much as we could. And so there wasn't conflict or confusion at the end, which
Well,
is
you are very lucky for that.
yeah.
Yes. I know a friend of mine who her they kept trying one thing after another with her mother, and her mother didn't want it,
Mhm.
but the doctor kept telling my friend and her brother, "This might be the thing that's gonna help her get out of the hospital and go home." And mom kept saying, "No, I don't want it. I'm
Mhm.
done."
Mhm.
And the guilt that the kids felt because there hadn't been these discussions ahead of time. It was just her now under duress, as
Mhm.
they saw it,
Yeah.
saying, "I don't want it."
Right. Right. And so that just brings up how important it is to have the conversations with your medical team and as well as family and friends. Your doctors need to know what your wishes are.
So
And
let's talk about that. An advance directive or the living will, are they the same thing?
no, they're different. And the advanced directive will goes into more detail about what you want or don't want to have happen. The living will base it will say, I was just looking at mine the other day. I don't want prolonged care. Well, what does that mean?
Mm, yeah.
It's very general. So the advanced directive goes into much more detail.
And that's
It's
the thing you give your doc.
That's right. That's what you give your doctor. And it's what if you have available so someone can access it right away. It's not in your safe deposit box at the bank. I keep it right behind me in my little box here behind my desk.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we've given a copy to the doctor and maybe the hospital, and then I have it in a notebook.
And you've given it to your family who are going to be making these choices with you or on your behalf.
Right. So that's the next part of the conversation. So once you've gone through, how do I want to be cared for? Let nature, follow the course. Who'd want with me? Do I want music? Do I want my lips wet? All of that. Now you've got to sit down and have that conversation, with your adult children or your partner or whomever is going to be your person.
Mhm.
And we hit a lot of resistance on that. Like,
Oh, for sure.
I mean, I was telling you that my boyfriend doesn't want to talk about this because he enjoys his life, and that's all he wants to think about is the enjoyment of his life.
That's Don't we all want to think about that? At the same time, I one of the best resources I've found is Finish Strong by
Hmm.
Barbara Lee. She was the president of Compassionate Choices for many years, and she has her chapter 2. I think basically sums it up. It's titled "Talking About Death Won't Kill You, but It Could Improve Your Life."
Hmm.
And it's really about how to have the conversation. And she and others always advocate have those conversations now. Do it now while you're in good health, while you can well, it is you're not under the duress of, "Oh my god, I have 3 months to live," or something like
Hmm.
that. And many people will say, "I don't wanna talk about it because it might make it happen," or, "It's too depressing," or, as your boyfriend says, "I'm living a good life, and that's what I focus on." And you can obviously you continue to do that, but you want to have that conversation. First is to have the conversation with yourself.
Mhm.
Till I get comfortable enough about what I think my wishes are, and then am I comfortable enough bringing it up with people? So if it's about yourself, then my daughter, I'll give you an example. My daughter, her father died 8 years ago, and she was not ready to be involved in end of life conversations. Yeah. She was, yes, you have to be on the feeding tube. You have to do everything you possibly can.
Hmm.
Now, for me, she says, I want to have this sit down with you. I want to talk everything through. I feel like I'm ready now to be your power, along with my sister, power of attorney for medical. And so it's a matter of partly when people are ready, but you have to have it prime it for many people. You just have to sort of plant the seeds and tell stories about others who did plan well or didn't plan well,
Yeah.
what they were facing. You know, that you never want to hear someone say, an adult child say, "Oh, we never talked about," which is
Mhm.
just what happened to a friend of mine just last month. Her
Really?
boyfriend died, and her adult daughter and adult son had no information whatsoever about her affairs. They didn't even know which one of them was power of attorney.
Is that right?
They did not know. They came to Chicago they both lived in the South. They didn't they didn't know anything about her bank, about her accounts, how to get into her computer,
Oh my goodness.
nothing.
So that leaves those poor children with so much extra
Right.
anguish. I mean, they're grieving their mother, and
Yes,
now they have to figure out where everything is and who does what. And oh
exactly.
my goodness.
So I visited with them when they were in town, and that's what they were doing. They were sort of still in shock, sitting. It was on a weekend, so they couldn't do anything with banks or, how to find out something. So they had started going through some of her personal effects. They didn't even know about those, about what to do with those, or the- they had no information. So they didn't even get to have the time or the chance at that point to just grieve and be in the moment of their mom has died.
Yeah. Well, that's so unfortunate.
Yeah. So that's an extreme, but it happens more often than not.
Oh, I think it does. Yeah. Are you a long distance caregiver who would like to easily connect face to face with your loved one? The Digital Health Companion from CareLink 360 is a safe, secure, and easy to use device that fosters regular social interactions. In addition, CareLink 360 can provide over 400 health and wellness modules designed around the multiple disease states, interests, and patients' capabilities. Their tools include brain and body fitness, speech improvement skills, attention and processing speed exercises, cognitive, physical, and occupational skill development. And there are reminders for medications, exercises, or activities that are crucial for the well being of your loved one. The Digital Health Companion from CareLink 360 is easy to set up and operate, no technical expertise required. It's designed for hearing and visually impaired. It's touchscreen enabled, and uses an open, safe, private, and encrypted network. Go to mycarelink360.com/ref/boomer to learn more. And when you're ready to purchase, enter Boomer in all lowercase at checkout for 5% off your purchase. I remember when, with my dad, and he died about 15 years ago. But like I said, we'd been having these conversations. He had kidney failure and he had COPD. So he made the decision to go off of dialysis. But that gave him the opportunity to pull the whole family together and really have his celebration of life while he was still alive. He got to speak to all of us, share his love with us. We got to share our love with him. And it was really I'm getting chills just thinking
Yeah.
about it. It was a beautiful as beautiful as a dying experience could be, and we had hospice at home. It
Mhm.
was, it was what he wanted, which made it so gentle.
Yes. Yes. Talk about having a good death.
Mm,
That's is an example of a good death.
mhm.
Most people, the research shows that most people say they prefer to die at home with loved ones around them. 75% don't get that.
Mhm.
That's a huge number of people who are intubated in the hospital or in someplace other than where they are surrounded by love.
Right, and their home and their comfort, and yeah, I know. Now, I've read plenty of advice where it says, if you wanna start these conversations, do it, like, at a family gathering, like after Thanksgiving dinner, and I can just see me saying to my children after Thanksgiving dinner, "Okay, let's sit down and talk about my," and they would walk out, it's like, let's not end a happy celebration with that. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I've read that many times also. That's not when I have done it or would do it. It's it's just more when you're with just not that where you're celebrating Thanksgiving or another holiday. It's to say, I've been thinking about, or I'm wondering, I realize that if something happened to you, I wouldn't know X. I wouldn't know what to do. And it's what I said to my mother was, I want to know more about you.
Mhm.
She wasn't one to talk much about herself. I
Oh, okay.
want to know more about what's important to you, how you think about death. Because I grew up on a farm, so that had death around us all the time, animals and relatives. We had open casket in the home and things like that. So we weren't strangers to it. I said, given how you were raised, Mom, but how do you want it to be for you? And what should I know? What could I know so that I make it easier for you and for my sisters and me? Well, that was easier for her to respond to. She got to tell a story of how she was raised, and what she believed. And then she was able to, she would say it's God's will, but again, toward the end, it was okay. I think God's making it quite clear what his plans are for me. So no more help.
Okay. Alright. So do you find that I mean, you did that as the child,
Mhm.
trying to understand. Do you find that the children will initiate these conversations, or does it typically have to come from the parent?
It's both sides. It depends. Sometimes the parent wants to initiate and the children don't want to hear it. Just like, we're not going to talk about that now. That's too depressing. I
Right.
just want to enjoy you while you're here. Other times the adult children want to discuss it and the parent says, I'm fine. I'm fine. We'll just, I've got it. I've got my living will. I've got this and that. Don't worry about it. So
Right.
again, it's more of that after I'm gone. So I don't know. I just wanted to, I have all these resources as I know you have many of them too, but I'll just show this one.
So what Catherine is showing says, since you're on the podcast, it says, "Fuck, I'm dead. Now what?"
So it's similar. It's a lot of these questions are in the compassion and choices, but this is more who to contact. What are your passwords? Where's your bank? Who takes care of your pets? Who's going to take care of your pet after you're gone? Um, who's your electric company? And all these really logistical things that you might not think about, but need to be taken care of. So that's the more practical toward the end. It also has a place where you can write about regrets, accomplishments, what you wish for your relatives, life lessons. So you can be as reflective as you want in that, but it's also one place where I would
Right. Which
write.
actually is an interesting thought. That might be an interesting way or an easier way to broach the conversation first by sitting down and saying, here's here's all my doctors in case anything should happen to me. I want you to know that. Here's where my passwords are kept. Here's the and so it's just it's not, "Okay, when I'm dying, this is what I want," you know? It's a little less threatening, but maybe it's a first pass at a conversation.
Mhm. I think so. Yeah, I think this is my daughter and I have started the conversations, plural. I think this is what I'm gonna turn to next, is just to say, "This is where you're gonna need this information," or, "I want you to know where this information is.
Yeah.
I'm accountable for keeping it up to date."
Mhm.
Passwords to change all the time.
Keeping it up to date is I have but my notebook and my mother's notebook on my table here next to me that I have to update a little bit. Talk to me about hospice care and palliative care and what that means as you're reflecting on your end of life.
So, palliative care provides comfort, support for someone who is facing a terminal illness, and you don't have to be dying yet, but you might need some medication support. So someone who's in palliative care could be getting medications. They could be getting assistance of different sorts. That's what my mother had when she was in assisted living for the end. And then eventually she did go into hospice, which is hospice usually is if you have diagnosed with 6 months or less to live, and they provide all different kinds of support, not medicine. So they're there to, you mentioned music. So they might provide hospice. My mother they provided someone who came and played her violin and sang, or guitar and sang at least every week, songs that she learned that my mother liked. And so she would sing my mom had, visits from the team. They cooperated with the staff at the assisted living place because they had certain rules. Has hospice says we're going to keep this person comfortable.
Right.
And if my mother had some bladder issues at toward the end, and so she was constantly calling for assistance. And the assisted living place said, we don't have staff to do all of this. And hospice said, well, then we will provide more care for her
Mm,
because she needs to be comfortable.
right. It is about the comfort. So they will provide medicines for anxiety and for pain,
Mhm.
yeah, not for
Curative.
healing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And some
Yeah.
people will think of hospice as, oh my gosh, gone to hospice, and, he or she is going to die next week or something, which sometimes happens. But people can enter hospice earlier in the phase of dying, 6 months or so. And some people um, flunk out of hospice because they get better.
And some people are in it longer than they anticipate, like
Not
Jimmy
very long.
Carter. Mhm.
Right. Right.
But I remember hospice also being a wonderful support for the family.
Yes.
I remember when they explained to us how difficult it was for my dad to be told he couldn't drive anymore and what that meant to him as a male. And they helped us in so many ways kind of understand some of the emotional
Mhm.
journeys that he was taking, but also afterwards, they provided counseling if you wanted it for the
Mhm.
loved ones who were left, which to me was amazing, and
Yes.
none of it cost any money.
Right. Right. Yeah. We have experienced that as well. So I live in Chicago. My mother lived in rural Minnesota. So I was driving there once a month for most of the last year. And hospice was they would I would be there when hospice came to visit, and they would ask us me as much about how I was doing as not just my mother, but and so there
Mhm.
was the emotional support. They took time to explain things, you know, that sometimes the assisted living staff, which were great, but they didn't have time to do all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think hospice is really a gift if you are willing to partake of it.
Right. And I think you need to be careful in your choice of hospice because they're
Mm,
not all the same. And more, some have religious affiliations, and so they might have more restrictions. Some are for profit, which is not in itself a bad thing. It's just that they might have different rules or regulations than a private care hospice. So those are,
so how do you find out?
you have to, you have to check around to see where are the hospice facilities and what's their philosophy? What's their
Mhm.
philosophy of care?
Yeah, and they provide what you need at home as well, not just in the hospital.
Right. Right. At home too. Yes. The
Mhm.
other part I wanted to mention was death doulas, because I've learned fair amount about death doulas now in the last few years. And so they are individuals who've been trained to be death doulas, and they're there to kind of fill in the gaps that hospice doesn't do. And so they are a tremendous support for the person as well as the family members. So I know two really well now, and one of them has a background in theater and in massage therapy, and so she often and healing. So she will come and be with the patient and sing or do gentle massage or whatever is going to help that person feel better within their spirit and their as well as their body. Another one, and she also she's developing a business where she creates caskets out of natural materials, bamboo.
Mm,
So she's very much can help people in terms of alternatives to being embalmed and some of those
mhm.
choices. And the other death doula I know is a geriatric care provider of geriatric care services. So she knows a great deal about services that families might not know about, or even hospice might not know about.
I'm glad you brought that up because I've seen that term and I really have no concept of what a death doula would do. So you're saying they fill in some of the care and comfort pieces that hospice is not available for or assisted living is not available for.
Right. So I was just through my Oak Park Action Team. We now during the summer we are at the farmers market. We are on the boulevard along with all the other causes and have information about end of life options. And this past Saturday, I was there with Tiffany, who's a death doula, and she was talking about she does a lot of sitting vigil with the patient, especially if the family can't be there all the
Mm.
time or the family needs a break. And that's hospice does that to some extent, but not what somebody would need for the later end of life stage. So she does a lot of vigil. Um, she's just she and Julie, the other person I know, they're just so gentle, loving souls that you would want them to be around.
Hmm.
They're just and they're so giving.
It's interesting. It's a certainly is a new field that although I guess, Catherine, is it really? I mean, when we turn of the century and that family I mean, you didn't call him a death doula, but you had that. You had the midwife when you were being, giving birth. You had somebody that came and sat with you and helped you with the person who was dying.
Hmm.
Somehow in the 20th century and 21st century, we kind of got away from that because of all the technology, I think. We thought, oh, there's all these extraordinary means to keep somebody alive.
Hmm. I think you're right. My grandmother was a midwife, birthing midwife, and she also sat vigil with many people in the community during their last days, weeks, and days. And it's just something that the community did for each other,
Mhm.
was to be there for each other. And it was, you're right, that at that time, of course, there were very few interventions. technological interventions. And so, yeah, it became it was a family affair, but it became a community affair as well.
Yeah. And now it's like in the behind closed doors and no one wants to talk about it. And we've made it scary. It's instead of recognizing, like you said, growing up on a farm, animals die, people die, everything dies. And it doesn't mean it has to be so terrible. I mean, it is a cycle of life. And
It's a cycle of life, and what you said at the beginning about this is not to undermine or dismiss the grieving process at all.
no.
There's still grief. There's still a grieving process. People handle that in many different ways. But I think to do the planned full end of life, have those conversations, it gives people room to grieve and not have it be so complicated.
Mhm.
Where are these forms? Where is this information? How do we, that is just so exhausting.
Yeah, when kids start to argue about the care for their parents, like if we hadn't had these conversations, I'm pretty sure that one of my siblings would have said, "Oh, no, 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 no. We're doing everything we possibly can." And, now that we know what they want, then you know.
And,
Then you know. I also think when I think back about my dad's passing, knowing that he was coming and we were able to talk about it, we were also able to talk about what we thought happened, like, is there
mm,
a spirit world? Could we be in touch somehow, Will you send me messages, Dad? You know, those kinds of things that if you were pretending it was never gonna happen, you can't even have those conversations, and I know, at least from my experience, both people are thinking about it, so
mhm,
why not talk about it?
yes. My mother truly believed that she would meet my father again in heaven.
Mm,
And so even though I might not believe that, it is comforting to know that that made it death more palatable for her, that she
mhm.
was gonna go and be with Arlo again, and
So if you were I know you do these talks and things, and you're advising somebody about how to get started, what are 2 or 3 things that you would advise them to start with?
well, as I mentioned, I think starting with the Compassion Choices, My End of Life Decisions booklet it's really a helpful place to start because you can do as much as you want. You don't have to sit down and do the whole thing all at once. And you can get that booklet for free by just going on the Compassion Choices website, and they'll send it to anybody. Um,
Okay, I'll put that in the show notes.
yeah. The other thing is, I think I read. I'm a reader. I found Finish Strong to be very helpful. I liked Being Mortal. Uh, uh, uh,
Oh, Atul Gawande.
uh, um, and so and because I'm facilitate our book club, we read about. I called it Living and Dying Well Book Club. We're reading about from a medical profession perspective, from people who have memoirs or people who have loved ones who have made the choice to how to when and how to end their lives to the whole gamut. So the other thing I think is can be helpful is if it's available in the community is attend a death cafe.
Oh, what is that?
It's a gathering of people. It's facilitated often by a death doula or someone who's really well trained in end of life options. And it's that people come and talk about their experiences. There's no lesson plan. It's just people talk. And the ones I've been to, sometimes it's people who are have a terminal illness and they're talking about what that experience is like
Mm.
and how they're trying to involve their loved ones in conversations. Others have a loved one has already died and they talk about what they wish they might have done or wish they had known or what it's like to still, be in the grieving process. I find them incredibly uplifting. People say, "How can you possibly spend a Sunday afternoon doing that?" But I think it's so healthy.
Tell me more about that. Uplifting in what way?
Well, to hear people like share their experience, they're at their most authentic selves. It's their story. It's in their there's a trust. There's a trust. It's not therapy per se, but it is when we are able to tell our story about something that is really life important to us,
Mm.
and others listen with respect and caring. I think that's really powerful.
Mhm. And I
I
think what you said there is so important. When we're able to tell our stories and others listen with respect and caring, and that's what an end of life conversation is about.
Yeah. Mhm.
That was beautifully said. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I people that just say, "How can you be involved in this?" So how could I not? I mean,
Mm.
it's
This
really
is life.
this
This
is
is life.
it's really important.
Yeah. Well, let me tell people how they can find you. If you have additional questions for Catherine or for Compassionate Choices, you can email her at Catherine with a C at womenover70.com. And I will put that in the show notes. And as I mentioned earlier, Catherine does have a podcast for women over 70. So you can check out her website, womenover70.com. She and Gail are way ahead of me with their episodes. I'm about to get to my 200th, but you are on like 200, almost close to 300 now, I
Close
think.
to 300, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Catherine. This has really been informative and helpful, and I appreciate your compassion as you spoke about it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
It's a pleasure. We need to be talking.
we do need to be talking. I also want to invite people to join the Boomer Banter conversations and get our newsletter. And you can do that by going to the website, heyboomer.biz, BIZ, and click on Connect with Us. And as I said, next week is my 200th episode.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I will be one of the things I hope to be doing there is answering some of the questions that I've received from readers, so readers and listeners. So if you have some questions that you would like to have me answer, you can email me at wendy@heyboomer.biz, which is what the show used to be called. So each episode of Boomer Banter is an invitation to listen, learn, and apply the wisdom gained to your own life. We are a supportive community, so join us as we age well together. The Boomer Banter podcast is produced by me, Wendy Green, and the music comes from Purple Planet Music. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Hopefully, we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much.